What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and it is lovely to be back in the driver's seat here today. Folks, we are doing so many fun things over the summer for Cannabis Lab. We have our monthly networking events. Our Orlando and Tampa chapter are growing exponentially. I'm really excited for that. I might actually be making a personal appearance. So if you guys want us to come to Orlando, you want us to come to Tampa, you want us to do a live podcast from one of those geographies, hit us up, leave a note in the comments, make sure you like and subscribe. If you don't have the time to sit here and listen to this interview and you want to catch it later, you can check it out at youtube.com/elevateyourgrind. For anything Cannabis Lab, check out joinclab.com. Join us on July 11th at the Marseille Hotel for our swim week fashion show. C Lab is hosting a fashion show. It is down at the Marseille Hotel. It'll be a ton of fun, so come check that out on July 11th. The July Fort Lauderdale Broward meeting, we might actually be moving that up to Boca Raton American Social. Selfishly for me, because it's closer to my house, I'm really excited to bring cannabis to Palm Beach County. So if you are in the southern Palm Beach County, you're in Pompano, Deerfield, Delray, all the way up to West Palm, come check it out at the Boca Raton American Social. I'll have confirmation with you for that for the next episode. All right, my guest today. God, we've been having some really good guests lately, huh? I'm excited for this one because this is one of my favorite topics to talk about in cannabis, even though it is quite depressing. We are going to talk all things finance, money, and everything else. Please welcome my guest today, Joe Lustberg, the managing partner of UpWise Capital. Joe, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Todd. Appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Well, it's great to have you here. Joe, what's going on, man? It's tough out there right now. I know that you guys are, a capital provider to the industry. What are you seeing right now from a high level? Because I don't think anyone has money.
Well, the equity markets are definitely dry. It's very difficult to raise equity in this current capital market, but debt is still prevalent. We're still doing debt deals. With a recession potentially looming, a lot of lenders are being a little bit more conservative. They're only originating deals to profitable businesses that are able to cover debt service ratio. But really the benefit of UpWise is that we're a marketplace. We work with over 100 different lenders. So we can work with a mom and pop, we work with MSOs, we work with all different types of cannabis businesses, whether it's ancillary, a manufacturer, cultivator, dispensary, really doesn't matter for us. So we offer everything from construction loans to equipment financing to working capital, line of credits, term loans, sale leasebacks, PACE financing. We're even doing tax credits now. We're doing the R&D tax credit and the employee retention tax credit. And then we even advance against that credit because it takes like 6 months to come in. So, UpWise is still actively funding deals. We're still, very pro cannabis and pushing the cannabis industry. Yes, it's tougher to get deals done these days. With interest rates rising and what's going on with the banking crisis and what happened with Silicon Valley Bank and Signature and all the banks. I was just talking to a banker the other day, and he said to me that 30% of all U.S. deposits left the U.S. banking system.
Wow.
So this is a bigger banking crisis than, 2008. And so
are we just going through a perfect storm of shit here where the cannabis industry is not, we'll call it, as far along as people had hoped? I'm sure that everybody, so I joined the industry end of 2018, and I remember back then people saying that it was going to be federal legality was 5 years away, or normalization was 5 years away. Here we are, it is 2023. We're 5 years away, and people still think it's 5 years away. That number has never gone below 5.
I think it's 10. So
honestly, I'll be honest, I think federal legality scares me more than anything else, or federal legality scares me more than anything else, because I recently had a stint where I had to go to the Social Security office, and just from that experience alone, I go, these are the people I'm going to trust to legalize cannabis. I don't think that's going to work out well. But I say that to say that everybody who dumped money into the cannabis industry originally thought they were going to print money and thought they were going to be in a much better position from now, where they probably thought they would take that money and reinvest it and really ride the upslope of the cannabis industry. But we hit our bubble, and it's not like tech. It's not like we can just get a giant market share and then all of a sudden turn on monetization. It is a CPG company. So you have all these companies that have physical products. It's an agricultural product, so it takes time to get your product to market. You have to be able to forecast 3, 6, 9 months ahead of time, and they're expecting Silicon Valley returns and Silicon Valley pricing, and it's just not happening, because I guess that was the last major industry we had pop up in this country. So you're at a point where everybody who originally invested in cannabis hasn't gotten a return on their money, and then the overall U.S. economy, even though the media won't tell you as much, is probably heading for the shitter right now. Is that just the perfect storm for this industry to be sucking wind?
I mean,
Or
it's
am I
not
just
just
speculating?
yeah, it's not just cannabis, to be honest with you. It's, it's every industry, right? We're going into a recession, so all industries are down and seeing slower sales than they've usually seen. But for me, cannabis has always been a state by state game, and it always will
Yeah.
be a state by state game, right? So even if federal legalization comes, I don't think that all cannabis is now going to be grown in Humboldt like wine country is, right? The states won't give up that tax revenue. Yeah. So what I think will happen when federal legalization comes is there will be interstate commerce. And states like New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts will do business with each other. Connected states on the West Coast will do business with each other. So for me, even when federal legalization comes, you know, I don't know what it looks like, but for me, it's based on what state you're in, right? If you're in California, you're in Oklahoma, you're seeing a very compressed market and operators
Yeah.
going out of business left and right. If
Uh,
you're in New Jersey or Illinois, which are emerging markets, you see operators thriving and doing very well. So we have a big focus now at UpWise on the East Coast. A lot of lenders that we work with are avoiding California, they're avoiding Oklahoma, they're avoiding Washington. So our focus lately this year for 2023 has been the East Coast and just building out New Jersey, Illinois, Connecticut just recently came on board, and then even New York.
well, let me ask a silly question there. And I have a thesis on what federal legalization might do. But to that point, California was a burgeoning market at one point. It's the biggest market we have, 4, 5, maybe $6 billion in total revenue. And it is an absolute dumpster fire right now. And it all starting, dispensaries stop paying their bills. They stop paying the distributors stop paying brands. Herbal just went out of business. I mean, I remember when I was running a brand in California, I would put an order into my distributor system, and essentially I get a call from the distributor saying, "Hey man, we can't send an order to that dispensary." Why? Well, because they haven't paid their bills in over 90 days for multiple brands. And what's happening is they just keep finding new brands to sell them shit, and they're not paying. And then they just move on to the next brand. They move on to the next brand. So all of a sudden we have what should be the most mature cannabis market in the country is literally a dumpster fire because nobody's paying anybody. So how do we prevent, because right now, New York, New Jersey, the emerging markets, they're in a great spot because there is no industry and people can come in and they can sell distillate cartridges for 60 to 70 bucks a piece because they're only competing with the black market, and they can sell apes for like 80 bucks. And that's outdoor weed. So you have this stuff that wouldn't fly in any other state from a price point. What happens when price normalization comes? What happens when these markets mature? How do we prevent them from becoming another California?
I mean, California's biggest problem is the illegal market and taxes.
Yeah.
So if the state doesn't dip too far into the operators' pockets, if they, like New Jersey just came up with some relief for 280E,
Nice.
so
That's
some states are, but the states that do have relief for 280, they have very high sales tax, so they're making their money on the sales tax, but really the illicit market is so big in California, it supplies literally
right.
90% of New York's cannabis, right? And you
But
go in.
But
to a
aren't
smoke.
all the taxes and everything else like right now? I think I don't remember how many square feet of canopy is not renewing their license, but with the shit that they're doing in California, they're just fueling the black market. They're just pushing these legal
Correct.
growers back into the black market.
Correct. And that's really what's happening in California, is that they're not paying their taxes and they're selling things illegally through illegal distributors. We even see Catalyst, who is currently in a lawsuit right now
With
with the
Glasso, yeah.
largest, yeah, with the largest grow facility in California, right? So saying that they're selling illegally to, you know, to in order to increase sales, because their numbers don't make sense unless they're selling it to the illegal market,
Yeah.
right? And if you go into a smoke shop here in New York, you have Alien Labs, you have Jungle Boys, you have FloraCal, you have 710 Labs, all California brands, fully packaged in the jar from California and scannable. So you could take that, go on the bottom, scan it, and it goes directly to the company's website. So from talking to California operators that I've financed before, one of my operators grows for one of those brands, and he was in Times Square and he saw that brand in Times Square. He pulled the jar down and goes underneath the jar to look, and it was manufactured in his facility.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, Joe, I don't do anything illegal whatsoever, but there are legal distros set up in California that are taking my product, selling it out the back door to New York for more profit because they can't stay afloat in California.
Same. My brand, I had text messages from friends in New York asking me when we got to New York because they were in a bodega and they saw our packaging on the shelves. And I personally ran the distribution. I didn't run the distribution, but I was the one personally coordinating between our cultivator, distributor, and retail stores in California. I knew who we were working with. I knew everything, and that was going on behind our back. So,
Crazy.
yeah, it's nuts, man. It is nuts. It is, it's upsetting because this is such a great industry. You've got people working so hard, and just because of all the ankle weights that they have being put on them, there are a lot of companies that are just not surviving or not going to make it through. Circling back to what we talked about with federal legalization, I think about that a lot too, because you have all these states and all these municipalities that put their neck out there to make it legal within their state and come up with this industry, and they're making a tax revenue off of it. State of Florida is a bunch of morons because all they're doing is taking licensing fees instead of taxing that $1.4 billion that's coming in by making it rec. Hopefully that'll change. But I honestly think if we get federal legality and interstate commerce, that 80% of every business in each state will be gone. I think you'll have a lot of great craft indoor cultivators that will stick around, but there's a reason why most of the wine from this country comes from Napa, not because that's where the best people are. It's just where the best growing conditions are. So I think
Correct.
you will have a significant amount of weed coming from California, especially the brands that have been notable so far. Like, for example, Alien Labs operates. You had mentioned them. I just spoke to Ted Lighty yesterday, which is why they're top of mind. So, Alien Labs produces in California, Arizona, and Florida. Ted spends most of his time in California. I guarantee you, when there's interstate commerce, Ted's going to figure out a way to increase his capacity in California to supply the whole country. He's probably not going to set up grows across the country because he knows he has his best conditions in Sacramento. So, and I could be wrong. I didn't talk to him about that, but that's how I kind of foresee it. So I think that's going to be another cataclysmic event, is when we do have federal legality, is I think a lot of companies are going to go out of business in local states because you have now the California competition. I don't think everybody will. I think there will always be a local, just the same way like craft beer is right now, right? You
Yeah.
have your Budweiser, you have your Coors, you have your Miller, and then you have, down here, I know a lot of people like Funky Buddha and all the ones that are local to the area here, and it's a good beer. And I think that's exactly what you're going to see. But at the end of the day, when you're going to a party and you need, to bring 3 cases of beers, you're going to go back to your Coors or your Miller or your Bud. So
Yeah.
maybe not Bud so much anymore.
I mean, I really hope that doesn't happen, and the pharmaceutical companies and the big tobacco companies don't start taking over cannabis. Social equity is a big part of the cannabis industry, especially in these emerging states, like New York, New Jersey, and other states. So the social equity applicants, like for example, in New York, they gave all the dispensary owners, all the dispensary winners were card applicants, meaning that they had a previous cannabis conviction and they ran a profitable business in New York and they were a New York State resident, right? So just by those regulations alone, they're trying to give back to the person who was affected by the war on drugs in New York, but also got back on his feet and was able to run a successful business, and show that he's a good member of society, right? So those social equity applicants were awarded those licenses, and the same thing with the cultivators in New York. Those were the old hemp growers. So when federal legalization comes to kind of just knock them out, right? Just because they're too small and there's somebody else who's going to come in and eat their lunch, I just don't think the regulators will allow that to happen, right? That's why I think it'll be a state by state game with interstate commerce, and the states will make agreements between each other. In California, California brands are already coming to New York, right?
Yeah.
Cookies has a dispensary in Herald Square. In New York, you're not allowed to put any food on your branding, right? So the word cookies alone is not allowed.
It's not a dispensary. It's an apparel store.
So it's an apparel store. They're building their dispensary on the third floor. They're calling it Burner's Palace. and then they're going out with the C as their brand, but no cookies, because they can't have cookies on the packaging. So, I mean, it just goes to show you that, California brands are already coming to New York. California brands are established. They have grown some of the best weed in the country for many, many years.
Yeah.
There's a reason that New York's illegal market gets their weed from California, right? Because of the growing conditions, like you said. But, for us, being a New Yorker, right, you want to keep that tax revenue with a New Yorker, with somebody who has grown up in New York, been a local New York, person. So that's really for us.
I have civic pride. So this is hard for me to explain because I'm a redheaded stepchild. I'm from New Jersey originally. I'm from East Brunswick, but my family has deep roots in Brooklyn. My dad worked in Manhattan most of my life till we moved down here to Florida. Every single job I've had has some kind of roots, or I'm in New York once a month. So I'm very proud to be associated with that city. To me, anyone can talk all the shit they want about New York. It's the greatest fucking city in the world. I don't care who you are. You come from a foreign country, you come to the United States. Where do you want to go? You want to go to fucking New York City and you want to see it, right? You got the best sports teams in the world, everything. So to me, there's a civic pride. If I go to New York, I want my weed grown from some indoor cultivation in the city from people who've been doing it for years, and they had the fucking backpacks and they were delivering in film canisters and they went legit. That would make me proud, and I think that would be a hell of a brand there. So I'm all for civic pride, especially to me. There's a big New York, California battle. So I agree with you. I would love to see the New York cannabis scene be somewhat self-sufficient and not just dumping California cannabis into New York.
I agree. I mean, for me, first of all, I'm a medical patient in New York. My brother is a card winner. So we have a dispensary coming. It's called Mott's. Mott's means really good, gassy New York weed. Like sour diesels and Kushes and Chems. So for us, bringing those New York flavors to market is what we want to do, right? And as a medical patient, it's very difficult to get the type of cannabis that I'm used to smoking. Sour diesels and Chemdog and hazes. You don't find that. You don't find that in a dispensary here.
No.
And like you said, the legacy grower who's been growing for 30 years, who has 4 delivery services in Manhattan and has 16 different grow operations throughout New York, has 42 employees, and is supporting a bunch of families. He grows the best weed in New York. He just won the sour diesel contest in New York. He's been my grower for many years. That is the ideal person to get a cultivation license in New York. So me and my brother, were featured in AM New York and Politics NY as the New York Cannabis Power Players. So once we were featured, I reached out to Schnepp's Media, which is the media company that owns AM New York and Politics NY, and we asked them to have a party at our office to honor all the 150 people that were honored as New York Cannabis Power Players. So the point of that was to get everybody in the room, right? And to get the OCM in the room. We had Tremaine Wright speak at our office, which was pretty great. And we were able to have those really difficult conversations with the Office of Cannabis Management, with the top cannabis power players, the lawyers, the accountants, everybody. And during those conversations, I said to Tremaine, I said, hey, you know, really, a lot of the weed in New York is outdoor currently. And if it's not outdoor, it's greenhouse. And obviously in New York, you don't have a full season of greenhouse. You know, you're only getting maybe 1 or 2 turns max, you know, so there's not a lot of really quality cannabis in the dispensaries in New York. And that's a big reason why these bodegas and smoke shops are doing so well, is because they're selling 1/8 of premium cannabis weed for $40. And you go to the dispensary and they're selling outdoors for $50. Right. So I said to her, there needs to be a path for legacy growers who have been growing the best weed known to man, right? Better than any California weed you will ever smoke in your life. Those guys deserve to get the licenses.
Yeah.
You need to create a path for them. And her response to me was, Joe, we're already doing it. Because they had a 2-week seminar where they brought 100 legacy growers into the OCM, and they asked the legacy growers to teach them about cannabis. And they're creating a path for these 100 legacy growers, and those are going to be the first ever micro business licenses in New York, where you'll get 5,000 square feet of grow. You'll get a processing, and you'll get a dispensary all in one location. So in New York, you can't be vertical. You know, the only vertical businesses are the MSOs who were medical. So you have to choose which avenue you want to go in, whether it's going to be cultivation, manufacturing, dispensary, or lab. Right. So once you're invested, like I'm invested in a dispensary, now that I'm invested in a dispensary, I can't invest into a cultivation or a processor or a lab.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So giving those guys the opportunity to be fully vertical, you know, does that give them a competitive advantage? You know, the only real big mistake I think there is only giving them 5,000 square feet, because the guy who I'm talking about, who grows some of the best weed out there, that's called Top Dog Genetics, and they sell seeds and everything. They've been doing this for 30 years, and they currently have probably 60,000 square feet of indoor cultivation all throughout New York. So to give that guy a 5,000 square foot space is not enough, right? No. That guy needs to run a big facility and put out that really good weed, so that New Yorkers can experience really high-end quality weed like they have for years. Like everybody says the best weed comes from California. Like, it's, to me, as a New Yorker, the best weed comes from wherever you are at that time, right? But it's indoors, right? You can grow weed indoors anywhere, right? You can grow weed indoors in New York, in New Jersey, or anywhere. So for me, I like you said earlier, there's a big competition between New York and California. For me, it's just different flavor, right? Yeah. Everybody's got a different flavor. Everybody's got a different taste.
I've always equated it this way, and I think it's apropos to this conversation, is California weed is like New York pizza, right? Like, I live in Florida. We have good pizza down here, but it's not common. I have to go find it. I can't just go to any pizza place and it's going to be amazing pizza. Like, when you walk around the city, with the exception of some of the dollar slices around Times Square, pretty much you're getting a pretty solid slice of pizza wherever you go. And that's how I look at California weed. For the most part, most of the weed you're going to get in California is pretty damn good. And then you go to other states, and I'll be the first one to admit it, down here in Florida, we have some good weed down here, but it's every dispensary has their good strain or a couple good strains. It's not like I can walk into any dispensary in Florida and get great weed. I have to know what I'm looking for, and I have to find it. So that's how I've always equated it. California weed, New York pizza, kind of similar there.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Two of my favorite things on the planet is California weed and New York pizza. So
Yeah, good
um
California weed and some good New York pizza go hand in hand.
they do, man. So tell me a little bit more about you and your background. You seem to know a good amount about this industry. You know a lot about the New York cannabis scene, throwing out the legacy New York strains like the sour diesels and the hazes, which are two of my
Yeah.
favorite. Talk to me about you. I see you've got a background in lending before. What made you want to
Get
join
into
this crazy
cannabis.
industry?
So
Why would you do that to yourself?
me and my brother have been in cannabis for our whole lives. When I say that, my passion for the plant, speaks louder than words. So I always say that I'm not your typical debt guy. Most debt guys are suit and tie. They don't smoke weed. They're just very by the book. We're not. I worked at a company called BizFi. They were the largest unsecured direct lender in the country, and I was their top sales rep. And then in 2014, I happened to fund the Green Solution out of Colorado on an unsecured deal. And I really just saw their ability to take expensive capital, use it wisely, and pay it off quickly. So, I grew with them over. When I met them, they had like 6 dispensaries. They went up to like 21 dispensaries, and then they ended up selling all. So that was like a story of two brothers, and that really hit home to me because, my story is me and my brother. So we started to focus on the cannabis industry because, there was no access to bank money, right? So we're an alternative financing lender. I started scouring the market to find different capital providers. I also started to convince traditional lenders to step into cannabis as well. And then really in during the pandemic, really we had to switch our entire business model overnight. All lending stopped. And we went and switched to PPP loans. So we did the Paycheck Protection Program. We were sending out like 250,000 emails a day, getting kicked off of every S&P provider out there.
Wow.
And we ended up originating 124 million in PPP loans to about 9,000 small businesses. But during that time, we were still funding unsecured financing deals. The only deals that we're funding were grocery stores, liquor stores, and dispensaries. The only. So I was like, wow, this industry is completely recession proof. We're still funding cannabis during the recession because it was, a necessity.
Well, that to me
So,
it was almost like a fake recession. Like it should have been a recession, but it
yeah.
wasn't. It was propped up, and now we're seeing the effects of that now.
Well, during COVID, right? And during the shutdown, right? Where nothing else was really operating, but dispensaries were
Yeah.
open, liquor stores were open, and grocery stores were open. So we really pushed cannabis in 2020, and that's when we saw a huge growth in the cannabis side. We still do traditional finance. We have a traditional side to our business. We have a real estate side to our business that just does mortgages. And then we have a cannabis division. I run our cannabis division, and then my partner Frank runs the traditional side. So cannabis really took off. I mean, in 2020, we funded 130 million to cannabis operators. Last year we were at 171 million to cannabis operators.
Well, good for
So
you guys. You went up.
yeah, we were growing year over year, every year with cannabis.
Yeah, the reason I say this is because I know 2021 the industry raised 1.5 billion, and then in 2022 they raised under 300,000.
Yeah, well, that's equity.
Yeah, I'm from the
Much
equity side.
much different than that. So I found that when the equity markets dried up, we started seeing better tier deals. So perfect example is when I first started in this industry, I was really working with small mom and pop businesses, a husband and wife team or, who raised family and friends around and then need some debt, but really in last year, I started speaking a lot at conferences. I spoke at Benzinga, I spoke at MJ BizCon, spoke at Canavest, and at MJ BizCon, my speaking gig was at 8:30 in the morning. I was like, who is gonna be awake at 8:30 in the morning in Vegas? And I started talking about PACE financing. So PACE financing is something very particular, and it's really something we really only understand. So PACE stands for Property Assessed Clean Energy, and it's a program that's been issued by the Department of Energy to offset capital improvements that are energy efficient. So when you're building out a cultivation and a manufacturer, a lot of your tenant improvements, the HVAC, the LEDs, those are energy efficient, pieces of equipment. So with PACE, they will lend 25% loan to value based on the as completed cannabis value of a facility. You have to use the money for energy efficient tenant improvements, but they will do that to the landlord entity, not to the cannabis entity. And they will do that with just a lien on the real estate tax assessment. And it comes in at 7 to 9% over 20 to 25 year amortizations. So once I really spoke about that product at MJ BizCon, it really opened up all the MSOs and larger customers and publicly traded companies to start coming to us. We're a broker, but we're a real broker, a good broker. Like if you go on our website or you go look at our review portals, we have real reviews from real cannabis operators. 80% of the lenders in cannabis, if you ask them for a reference, they won't give it to you. Right. Or it's a very shady industry. These people aren't proud when they finance a big cannabis deal, or some of them will put out a press release, but they don't get reviews. Nobody has review portals. For us, we just want to be transparent, right? We're very upfront. We will tell you the cost of capital from day one. If the cost is going to be 15% and it's too high for you, I'm not going to tell you it's going to be 10%. I'm going to tell you what you're going to get, So that's really gone a long way for us in building our reputation over the years, is just telling it how it is, showing people how passionate I really am for cannabis. And, the lender's job is to fight for their investor and to get the money back for their investor. My job is, as a fiduciary, is to get the best deal possible for my client. So when I work with you, it's me and you versus the lender, so a lot of people, they get a bad taste when they want to work with a broker. Brokers charge upfront fees, brokers charge success fees. Why wouldn't I just go work directly with the lender? We're a little bit different. We don't charge any upfront due diligence fee. We only charge based on success. We don't ask for exclusivity, which everybody in cannabis asks for. And, we actually do our job. And then I always say that we're much more than just a capital provider. Like, to give you an example, we built out a cultivation in Massachusetts, and it was 2 real estate owners. They just owned the building. They didn't really know much about cannabis. So we connected them with Catalyst BC. It's ran by my good friends, Ian Miller, Michael Williamson, and Leif Olson. And they currently manage 7 million square feet of canopy, including all of Crestville Labs facilities. So they are, just that cannabis experience that comes in to help an operator make his business profitable, make sure that it's most energy efficient. So we bring value, I always say.
I'm glad to see that, obviously people are still trying to fund this industry however they can. And I know a lot of companies have raised a significant amount of debt. I think that's probably some of the issues the MSOs are having, is they've raised a ton of money on debt, and now they're raising more money to pay off that initial debt and restructuring it. When you look at debt financing, there needs to be something that the company owns for you guys to be confident, and correct me if I'm wrong, but to be confident enough to lend to that company, right? We're at a point in time where one of the more successful business models, and these companies are still raising capital, are these asset light brands that just license their brand, their name, image, and likeness to different cultivators or vertically integrated operators around the country. I feel like those are the hardest people, because They've been trying to raise out equity capital. It's not working. And they don't really have much for you guys to take as collateral for debt. So what do you suggest for, are people lending to those companies? What's happening with these asset light brands? Or are they just kind of stuck where they need to figure out a way to raise equity?
Yeah, so I come from unsecured financing. That's the world that I grew up in. So cash advances, line of credits, term loans. It's strictly secured by a first lien UCC1 on the business. There's no assets attached to it. It's based on the cash flow of the business.
Sure.
So typically, we're able to lend about 100 to 150% of their monthly revenue. So if they're doing 150,000 a month, we'll give them around 150,000, on a 12-month term or less.
Okay.
So unsecured financing is available. It's definitely a little bit more expensive. Unsecured capital in the cannabis industry typically comes in around 2 to 3% a month. Then you're looking at 3-month terms to 18-month terms, really just depending on the borrower's profile. But we do a lot of unsecured financing and a lot of line of credits. It's a big part of our business. But if asset-based lending, construction loans, equipment financing, those, if you're a startup and you're in a new state like New Jersey and you're trying to build out a cultivation facility, you have no history of running a cannabis business. You have no history of sales. You have maybe some liquidity on your personal financial statement. But in that particular instance, if you're a startup, we need an asset, right? It needs to be secured. For a construction loan, it's secured by first lien position on your property, and equipment financing, it's secured by the equipment. So if you don't have cash flow currently and the business is not operational, there still is options for you, but you need an asset to be able to leverage in order to do that. And really the difference between us is we understand cannabis. So we'll lend based on the as completed cannabis value of a facility. So typically we're lending 70% loan to value based on the as completed cannabis value, or 65% loan to cost. Rather than looking at the property from a real estate valuation and just lending them on the real estate value. Because once you attach a cannabis license to a property, the value of that property instantly goes up.
Agreed. Let me ask a stupid question. Are you having a harder time finding deals these days because a lot of companies have already raised debt, and just there are a lot of companies that are struggling because they've been trying to raise capital for a year and a half and just can't? And I mean, I think we're at a point in time and you're seeing a lot of, even in the equity side, you're seeing a lot of predatory deals trying to be done, but they're not really predatory because these companies need capital. Like they're holding on to their heyday valuations here.
Yeah. I mean, I was just on a panel at CWCB and they said, if they can go out and buy Truly bonds at 17%, why would they lend to any operator at anything less? Right. So if that means that certain lenders are lending at 18%, it's really not sustainable going forward in the future. But for me, raising debt and getting clients is the easiest part of the equation. It's collecting the documents. That's the most difficult part of the equation. Getting a full data room from cannabis operators is a job in its own, right? But we do really good with SEO. So if you Google anything cannabis financing related, cannabis working capital, cannabis real estate loan, cannabis equipment financing, UpWise Capital is #1 or on the first page. And I approach the industry a little bit differently. So rather than, similar to the way you do, right? Rather than going out and going directly, when I'm at MJ BizCon, I'm not sitting at my booth and networking with customers. What I'm doing is I'm walking around to my partners, Fluence and Fos and Pip and Grow Glide and Cerna and all the big equipment manufacturers. So we partnered with all the big equipment manufacturers to be their equipment financing arm. They send the larger $5 million deals to Excess and the smaller deals under $5 million to us. So because we have such great partnerships, our deal flow really hasn't changed, but the amount of deals that get across the finish line, it definitely has changed.
Yeah. what are you looking for right now? What are the opportunities that you see in the space for a lender to be able to be successful here? Because it's got to be very hard right now, kind of guessing who's going to make it and who's not. I mean, if you look at, there's probably a ton of great brands that were working with Herbal out in California that haven't been getting paid. Now that Herbal's going under, they're not going to, and who knows if they're going to make it out of this, right? So, you know, if you don't know about that situation, you could have gotten into a bad deal before that happened. You know, what type of deals are you looking for? Where do you see the opportunity?
We're looking for good borrowers, right? I always say that we want liquidity. We want them to have some sort of cannabis experience, and they have to have the ability to execute that business plan. Um, we're looking for people who are all in. Like I can give you the perfect example of a borrower. The guy raised $22 million in equity for his Michigan cultivation. They have an 85,000 square foot cultivation, and he raised $22 million from like 1,300 individual investors. And I was like, wow, you really raised a lot of money. And he's like, yeah, I went to Temple, I went to my mom's Mahjong class, and I did everything I could. So he raised as much equity as he could. And then he went and refinanced his house, put all his money from refinancing his house into the business. And then at some point during the construction, they needed HVAC, and we came in and we did an equipment financing deal. And I went out to Michigan and I toured two different facilities. I toured his facility, which is GMP certified, absolutely beautiful, 36 different strains of cannabis, all above 27% THC, really, really good high-end product. The average price per pound in Michigan right now is $1,200. He's selling at $2,300.
Wow.
Then I went from his facility to River Rouge to another grower who is a client of mine, and he's selling at $700 a pound. And just to see the difference in the quality that these guys built compared to what this guy built and what he's putting out, it's night and day. And they're in the same state, competing in the same dispensaries. So the first borrower has everything into his business. And I said to him, like, wow, you guys really, built this place out nice, or when are you going to be able to get all your other rooms up and operational? Do you have any concerns? And he looks at me and he's like, Joe, he goes, I have everything in this business. It cannot fail. And that's the type of borrower I want to work with. Somebody who is putting their own back against the wall and knows that this is everything to him, right? And is going to do whatever it takes to make this successful. Because, like you said earlier, everybody wants to get into cannabis for the green rush, but nobody realizes how difficult it is to run a cannabis business and how difficult it is to sustain a profit in cannabis when you're taking debt at 17%.
Yeah. No, I agree, man. I'm still very, still very bullish on the industry as a whole. It ain't going anywhere. I just don't know what it's going to look like 5-10 years from now. I don't know if my friends in the industry will still be here or in the industry in the capacity that they're in. I don't know if the brands we see today will still exist or at least exist in the incarnation that they're in. It's really interesting to see what happens because it is facing a lot of troubles right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with just where we are in history. I think that I had this conversation with Ted yesterday, and I said, I think the last industry, the major industry that this country had pop up was tech. And tech is, I want to say it's fake. It's not fake, but it's not a physical product for the most part. It's a lot of software. It's a lot of internet-based things. It's a lot of services. There's no tangibility to a lot of the tech companies that we've seen. So they were able to have hyper growth as long as they had capital and then get to a point where they can start selling ads and turn on monetization relatively quickly and have these, ungodly revenues. Whereas all of a sudden now we have this agricultural / CPG industry pop up, and all these investors still have these tech returns and tech valuations in the back of their mind, and they're applying it to cannabis because it is just a high demand product. But you can't rush a plant cycle. You can't put more into them. Like I remember, so running the cannabis supply chain for our company, I ran a software and services business before that. So if I got a new client, we spin up whatever they bought out of thin air. It didn't exist. We created it, existed for that client. If I got 1,000 clients that month, it wasn't that we didn't have the supply to give them. We just spun up new licenses, gave them access to the software, right? The only thing that I was restricted on is my engineering time. And I could always just go out and buy more not buy more engineers, but 1099 a couple engineers or hire some. I can't, if I only have, 20,000 square feet of canopy, I can't sell more than 20,000 square feet of canopy just because I have that opportunity. I have to plan it and I have to find it and I have to build it out. Right. So to me, I feel like we took money from people that just didn't understand the industry and expected it to be tech.
Yes, and yes and no. It really just depends,
Well, that's how I justify it to myself.
It really just depends on like when you raised your capital, and yes, there were a lot of investors that thought this was going to be a huge green rush and got burned, especially in states that were compressed, right? It really goes down to the regulations in that state. You look at a state like Massachusetts and Michigan, where it it was like popping a tic tac to get a license. It was so easy to get a license in those states. They gave out way too many licenses. They were making money on the licensing fee, their little $2,500 fee, but that caused way too much competition, caused compression in the market, and caused the price per pound to go down. So really the successful states that you see are the limited license states, that have done it correctly from a regulatory standpoint, and California is the example to not follow. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm still pro cannabis. I'm still very bullish on this industry.
Same.
I will always be bullish on cannabis. It's a passion for me. But, we're definitely going through some tough times right now, but you just got to pivot, right? Right now, the emerging market in cannabis is the East Coast, so that's where a lot of lenders' focuses are.
Yeah.
And it's going to happen, right? Like the price per pound right now is like 4,000 a pound in New York. There's no chance in hell that will stay the same.
For outdoor.
It's greenhouse.
Greenhouse. Okay. Listen, I'm waiting. I would love to see vertical integration get broken up in Florida, not for any reason that any advocate wants it to be broken up, is I just want to see more job opportunities down here in Florida for people to get into non-retail positions in the cannabis industry. We got $1.5 billion in revenue off of 800,000 patients, and there's literally 22 companies that you can work for if you want to touch the plant. So if unless you really want to go into retail in the state of Florida, it's very hard to get a position that you can support a family on in the cannabis industry unless you're working remote. So I'd love to see vertical integration get broken up here just for the employment opportunities. But I'm very bullish on the industry as well too. It's going to succeed. It's going to be normal. It's just a matter of what happens. And I can tell you when I lost my gig in cannabis and I started looking back to go into tech, and I'm seeing hundreds of thousands of people getting laid off at tech, I looked and I go, well, I can go through some bullshit in tech, or I can stay in the industry I love and go through the same shit. I'm going to stay here. So, that's what kept me in cannabis. And I love doing this show and I love what I do. And I found myself in a really good position. So let's transition, because we spent the last hour talking about what's wrong with this industry. Tell me what excites you. What makes you look forward to the future?
I'm excited about New York. I grew up in New York. I'm a New Yorker. I love my state. I love my weed. I want New York to be a successful state. I'm very passionate about building out New York operators, and getting them to the level of the California operator, and, having I want New York to be indoor weed, right? And they recently just passed regulations allowing for larger canopy space. So, we're building gradually, but they also recently just let the MSOs enter into the market. So in December, the MSOs can pay a $20 million fee to enter into the recreational market, and that's kind of one of the big mistakes that they made in California, right? Is, letting these large operators who have limited amount of capital to plant their flags come into the state, really just creates a real quick imbalance, right, with the card applicants. So for me, I just want to see the state built out. I want to see some really good weed, and I want to see, the country keep growing. I would love for safe banking to pass. I would love for federal legalization to come. Do I think that's going to happen? Safe banking will happen before federal legalization. I was just talking to a lawyer last week, and he's like, Joe, federal legalization is at least 10 to 15 years down the road. And I was like, wow. And he knows a lot more than I do. So when a lawyer who studies that stuff tells me that, I really take it, pretty seriously.
Agreed, man. Well, Joe, I appreciate your time. It's been a great conversation. Definitely want to have you back to talk about more stuff. Anything you want to plug before we let you go?
Yeah, just reach out to UpWise Capital. We do all types of cannabis financing, and then look out for Mott's. Mott's is our cannabis dispensary. It's called Mott's Only. We're actually going right now. My brother's here. We're about to get in the car and go look at locations in the Hamptons and Riverhead. So we're approved on Long Island for a dispensary. We're going to have a dispensary, delivery, social consumption lounge, and we'll have 3 locations in New York. So now that I am a cannabis operator myself, I see the struggles that these guys go through with raising equity, finding real estate, just dealing with these landlords, dealing with the municipalities, dealing with zoning regulations. The second we won that license, I say I became a lobbyist overnight, because now I'm talking to, town supervisors and all these people, and that's really what it takes. And it's crazy what these guys go through. And now I get to see it kind of firsthand, which is, a really cool experience.
It is, man. Well, Joe, thank you so much for your time, and thank you to everybody at home for watching another episode. If at any point you missed part of this episode, you can check it out at youtube.com/elevateyourgrind. For all things C Labs, check out joinclab.com. For upcoming events, Google Cannabis Lab Eventbrite. Folks, it's been another episode of Elevate Your Grind. We'll see you next time.